So again, for format today, as I shared in the email that did go out, I'm going to ask a few questions of Dr. Weinman, but then we're definitely kind of going to open this up to the floor for you all to ask some follow-up questions in addition to what I asked. If you'd like me to ask the question, please just go ahead and type it in the chat feature, and I'll get to that afterwards. But otherwise, just given the size of the group, we'll open the conversation up from there. I do want to also thank Sean Kaler, who's on the call today as well. Sean's the VP of Enrollment Management at Marist. He's the one that, thank you, Sean, for putting us in touch with Kevin. Sean's on the board at St. Bernard's in Uncasville, Connecticut. So Dr. Weinman, Kevin joined Marist College as its 5th president in October of 21. Great time to join a university in COVID. I'm sure there's some stories there. Kevin's academic and professional careers combine scholarship in the history of urban planning and public policy with extensive financial and administrative leadership in the private sector, as well as higher education. He spent more than a decade working for firms like Hewlett-Packard and Western Union before moving into higher ed and spending 15 years in administrative leadership roles at Dartmouth and Amherst. A hands-on leader, he's deeply committed to the powerful blend of liberal arts education, pre-professional and professional training, and graduate research and scholarship that are the hallmarks of a Marist education. He's applied his financial and administrative leadership experience to advance access, equity, and excellence in all his higher education roles. So, Kevin, welcome. Glad to have you here today.
Glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Good. So Kevin, at a very high level, so one of the 5 questions I want to ask you, and this is something our chief administrators are going to be following up in a couple of weeks, is this notion of high functioning boards and what is a high functioning board. So in that, I want to just know from your perspective, what do you need from your board of trustees, and what does a high functioning board look like, and how does that support you in your role?
Yeah, great question here. So before I became president here at Marist, I was very lucky to have sort of grown up in the world of finance and administration at Dartmouth and Amherst, because that means I've been working really closely with boards, since I came to higher ed in 2007. I staffed 5 different board committees at Amherst. And so there really is no one formula for this question. The things that I value, Sean, who staffs our enrollment committee of the board at Marist, knows this, is that I'm first and foremost looking for substantive conversations, right? That we're using our committee meetings for dialogue on key matters. We're helping as administrators who were hired to do these roles and do them, 40 plus hours a week, many more than that. To help educate the board on the challenges that we're facing and our plans to address them. Yet we also bring members on the board because we believe they have important things to say and offer for these conversations. At Marist, we try to carefully marry board member interest in different topics, be it finance or enrollment, academics, and try and create committee assignments that speak to board member interests. From that, we just onboarded 4 new board members, and I'm pretty clear in my expectations of them that they view their committee assignments as duties, that we're looking for conversations in committees where board members have taken time to become knowledgeable, not only about what the college is doing, but what's happening more broadly. They've read the materials in advance. They've come ready for discussion, not to be talked at for 60 minutes. Because to me, that's really where the work of the board occurs in greatest earnest, which is in our committee conversations. And then we can introduce what was discussed in sentiment at the full board meeting that we have on our day 2. But the board can rest assured that their fellow board members are taking their assignments very seriously and are engaged in deep conversations with administration. I think you're on mute. Yeah.
It's a rookie mistake there on Zoom, I tell you. Um, Talk to us a little bit about continuing education of the board. I mean, most our institutions have governance committees. One calls itself a trusteeship committee. I think when you and I spoke earlier, Marist also has a similar committee. So what does that ongoing education look like? What do you think the role of a governance committee or a trusteeship committee should be to help bring better development to the board?
Yeah, we try and we over time tried to use our board meetings not just to race through the usual business, right? I mean, we have to approve the audited financial statements. We need to set tuition, like all those things need to happen. But we've dedicated more and more time to broader conversations. So great example, Sean led a multi-hour conversation that was quite riveting and stimulating despite its length with the board about the admissions landscape, right? It was, we gave them some pre-reads and they came ready to spend several hours on what are the challenges and opportunities? What did the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action mean for us? What are our competitors doing with respect to discounting? What are our own strategies with respect to recruitment, be it marketing and communications or admissions recruiters located around the country? So, you know, getting out of that day-to-day mindset and helping board members who we know are busy people and have you know, forms of expertise in their day jobs and what they like to do outside of work. So I view it as our obligation to make sure that we are helping keep our board apprised. It's one of the reasons why they want to serve on the board, is to understand and learn more about what's going on in higher education at an institution that they love, and be in position to make meaningful contributions to the conversations and decisions that will follow. So, you know, in addition to a fairly robust onboarding and orientation for new board members, you know, we've tried to make use of each meeting for at least one deeper dive topic. We've also just added a fourth meeting of the board, which is entirely focused on a topical matter. So one year it was our emerging strategic plan, where we don't have committee meetings. We don't take minutes. It's really meant more as a retreat / offsite. And I've seen the board really be engaged and energized at being asked to participate at that level. I think it's gone quite well.
Great, thank you. Let's talk about tracking and monitoring board member performance. Do you have any recommendations about that? I mean, we got to respect the fact that they're volunteers, but at the same time, looking to, again, support them via tracking or monitoring process, and also speak to how you collaborate with board leadership at Marist to build the board you have today.
Yeah, it's a great question. Here, I'll talk a little more about our governance committee that you asked about in the last question. One of the first things that we did after my arrival was do an assessment of the board itself through a third party out of Harvard, where we asked the board to report on its experience through a survey and through one-on-one conversations. What's going well? What do you want to do more of? Where are we spending too much time? Really trying to get a sense from each board member, their level of satisfaction with their experience. That also helped us inform recruitment efforts for new board members. We had a number of openings, which I, with the board chair's approval, we jointly decided to hold on to those openings until we got through this assessment and we really understood what skills and experiences do we have versus what skills and experiences do we need. Where are we overrepresented in various markers of identity and contribution versus others here, and we're able to do some intentional recruiting for new board members here in this recent cycle. We just added a really talented cohort of 4 of them. One of the notions coming out of the overall review, which was something that we knew, which is we didn't really have a professionalized approach towards board member performance, be it meeting attendance or philanthropic contributions commensurate with capacity. a board self-assessment on, how do you think your service is going? Are you contributing to your greatest? Are you ready for meetings? Are you contributing to the greatest degree that you think possible? And now each member of our governance committee is assigned to have a year-end conversation with each other member of the board to, in a cordial way, sort of, talk through some of those findings and maybe gently nudge if somebody hasn't been to the last 2 or 3 conversations, or maybe isn't contributing as much in the meeting itself. That peer-to-peer approach towards performance evaluation and assessment, in addition to having a heavy self-assessment component to it, has been received really well. Some of these are tougher conversations where a board member can look another board member in the eye and say, hey, listen, if this is not a top interest of yours, or if your life circumstances have changed a bit, and you can't be all in on your service to Marist, that's totally fine. Let's have that conversation, and if it's time for you to step aside and somebody else who may be at a point of their lives where they're ready to step in, we can have that conversation. And it really helps avoid when it becomes an issue and somebody then really needs to pull a board member aside and have a conversation. You really want to avoid that. You want to be addressing this as we go forward on a peer-to-peer basis.
Mm-hmm. And Kevin, are those annual conversations, or I think you and I had also talked, like, are Marist trustees, are they on 3-year terms? Do you also have some conversations when they're coming into a term and about renewal of another?
Yeah, they're annual conversations, but they're much more intense when it's a 3-year term expiration. So prior to this most recent round of reforms to board membership, we didn't have term limits at all. So we've got one board member is on his 16th 3-year term. But we now just instituted a maximum of 4 3-year terms, so a 12-year service for new board members, with an option for a 5th term if they're in a leadership capacity, be it a vice chair of the board or a head of a committee.
Mm-hmm. Great. Do a little pivot towards strategic planning. So can you talk to us about, Marist's recent history with strategic planning? How did you leverage the board in that? What's the board's role? And talk a little bit about making sure we protect lanes, the board's role, the board's lane with strategic planning versus management, the CEO, the president.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a really exciting story for me. We just launched our 7-year strategic vision for the future called Marist 100. We hit our centennial in 2029, and since the plan straddles both our 1st century and our 2nd century, we played off that in the name of Marist 100. I spent my first year here, as I think any president should do, doing a lot more listening than doing. Not a full-on listening tour. We place needs to move forward. We had to make some decisions quickly, but in general, trying to understand this institution that has such a strong history, such a strong culture, all to our benefit and to a new president's detriment if he or she doesn't come in with a curiosity and a desire to really understand what makes the institution tick. So the 2nd year is when we engaged in a strategic planning process. Marist, like most education institutions, there's an expectation of shared governance, particularly with the faculty, but also a real, intense love for institution and a desire to participate in shaping its future. It's one of the things that brought me to higher ed in 2007 after 15 years in the business world, where I really enjoy working at a place where everybody wants a voice, and we are much better off if we introduce those voices into the process. My job would be a whole lot easier sometimes if I could make quicker decisions and just, be more top-down command and control, but that doesn't work here. Nor do I think that would lead to the best vision for the institution. So we organized the strategic planning process around 6 working groups that looked at various elements of the institution, be it diversity and inclusion, admissions and enrollment, the academic model, the student experience, and each one of those 6 areas was broadly represented by its membership. So trustees served on every single one of those committees and met as frequently as the rest of the committee did, composed of students, faculty, staff, and in some cases, alumni. And all of their insights and analysis fed into the central part of the process led by my chief of staff and a faculty member. And from that, we created a draft of the strategic vision for the institution. Trustees also participated in another way, which is at their 3 meetings that year, 2 of those 3 meetings included half-day retreats, where we asked the board to, we assigned them to groups, and they had different conversations about elements that these committees were working on, and they provided their insights and input. So one of the most gratifying parts to me about the process as it concluded, and we had the board, we set aside 90 minutes for the board to discuss the draft of the strategic plan. Within 5 minutes, maybe 10, they were already on to what are the metrics and how are we going to measure? Like, they were so bought into the plan. One of the trustees had said, when I read through the plan prior to this meeting, I could remember specific moments during our board offsites where somebody said what I ended up reading in the plan. So they were really able to see how their contributions and input made it into the plan, and we took their insights very seriously, because my view is if we're going to ask trustees what their thoughts are, we better act on it here, because there's probably nothing more frustrating to a board member than to be asked for input and then not see the results of that input be acted upon. As you suggest, there's some risk to this, right? Because the more we invite the board into these conversations, both on committees that where they're sitting next to students and faculty and so forth, the more we risk boards overstepping in ways that they seek to become involved in operational matters or items that are not granted to boards for their for their authority. I'd rather manage that than the opposite, which is a hesitant board that's not pushing the boundaries, right, and waiting to be asked for input and not providing it more proactively. So again, because our board is very collegial and we have board member to board member conversations, where we've had rare moments where board members are straying a bit more into the administrative and operational side, or matters that are really owned by the faculty, we're able to have relatively quick conversations without too many hurt feelings there. But again, I'll take the risk of an over-engaged board versus an under-engaged one any day of the week.
Sure. Can I visit one of the points that you just made? Again, any strategic plan, yes, it has to have those metrics and some accountability measures. As a president of the institution, what do you think are proper ways to ensure, like, institutions can be great at the strategic planning, but the strategic doing, actually putting it into action, making sure it doesn't collect dust and just look pretty on your website. How does the board hold you accountable and the team accountable to ensuring that plan comes to fruition? What do you think is a fair way for a board to work with leadership to hold accountability to the plan?
Yeah, I mean, everything in the plan has to be measurable. So this is where having a board, as many boards are, heavy with folks from industry who are used to running their enterprises or being a part of enterprises that are metrics driven and bottom line driven. I have to remind my board all the time that we're a mission-based institution, and a financial surplus at the end of the year is not necessarily what we're after here. We're looking to advance the mission of the college. But that said, everything in the plan can be measured. And so we created a proposal of a dashboard. Well, first of all, we created a proposal with Sean's help and others of who we consider to be our peer institutions, who are we comparing ourselves against, who are our existing peers, and more importantly, who are our aspirational peers, because the goal of this plan should be to position ourselves much more closely to those schools that we view as aspirants at this point in time versus simply keeping pace versus our peers. But we owe that to the board, right? The board has a general sense of who our peers are and who they're not. But we own a proposal to the board that's informed based on Sean's knowledge of who we competing against for admitted students, chief financial officer's knowledge about resources per student available at other institutions, those kinds of things. So defining who is it that we're comparing ourselves to, and who do we aspire to be, and then coming up with a board appropriate dashboard. So for us, that's about 18 measurements here that we will report on quarterly if there are items that we can measure quarterly, but more of them are typically annual measures. And we're going to post it on our website. We're going to make it visible and to our board and have conversations about that over time. But that said, I don't have the luxury of only focusing on 16 or 18 things. Every element of the college has markers and data points that I want to know how we're doing. I also don't just want to know what's our retention rate, for example. I want to know what's our retention rate, male versus female. What is it versus markers of identity? Are we, the students who come from far away, do we not retain them well because they don't feel welcome here in New York and we're not taking care of their needs, for example. So, we have dashboards below the dashboards. It can be a little overwhelming, but I think that's what a board should expect, is even if we're not routinely, sharing and discussing, hundreds and hundreds of metrics with the board, we're going to focus on, again, those top 18 or 20. The board should have a full expectation that that's how we're running the institution and should at least be aware of the kinds of things that we think are important to measure.
Great, thank you. And I appreciate the distinction too on disaggregating some of that data. I know at least on the Catholic secondary school level across this country, that's probably an area of greater need amongst a lot of Catholic high schools, elementary schools today. I'm going to pivot to a completely different topic here, and then we'll open it up to some questions. Hopefully we touched upon a broad enough set that the group might have some questions. There are very few organizations within the last few years that haven't been challenged to take a critical look at how they approach all things in the wheelhouse of diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's been a lot of movement in that, a lot of necessary movement, perhaps some things that are long overdue in terms of how organizations look at their response to issues on DEI. So talk to us about, Marist's approach to all things DEI, but in particular, how the board might have been leveraged in this capacity.
Yeah, it's a very timely topic for us because we use some very public incidents here over the last few months to engage with our board at the last board meeting about, what DEI is and what it is not. It's very easy to caricature and vilify in ways that are challenging to us as higher ed institutions. So first and foremost, helping our board understand that becoming more diverse, equitable, and inclusive is not new. It's not a fad. It's not something that's going to come and go. We've been doing it since the earliest days, and it's because we really believe that making Marist education available to anyone, anywhere in the world who has the capability of succeeding here is not only square within our mission, it's the wisest, business strategy. And I use that word with the board because it's one I think that they really understand, right? That if there's a talented student out there, but they're not coming to Marist because we have not become diverse and inclusive in ways that resonate with them, we're not going to be in business. We're not going to be around for very long, right? So the affirmative action case is, Sean can comment on. Was a real opportunity for us to educate the board on what we do and don't do. There's a misunderstanding among many that affirmative action somehow is a handout or it's we're rewarding somebody who hasn't earned an admission slot. We've never admitted a single student in the history of this institution that we thought couldn't succeed here. So everybody earned their admissions letter, but they all come here with very different needs and very different levels of preparedness. So even things that I think board members don't necessarily instinctively think of as a DEI strategy around, say, tutoring or a mental health counseling, or our Office of Accommodations and Accessibility, right? These are things that we're doing to meet the diverse needs of a student body that, again, is prepared for, is capable of success. But because they may have gone to a high school that was, where their class sizes were 40 students and they don't, they're not ready yet to get an A in a calculus exam, right? That we're going to provide those extra forms of support, and that's again squarely within our mission. So I think being careful not to allow some of the terminology we use to become vilified and to explain in different terms what we're doing and what we're not doing, I think is really important for for presidents and engagement with boards, and something that I encourage our board to get past the headlines a bit, that what you're seeing happening, on any given day at Harvard is probably not reflective of the 4,000 colleges across the rest of the country, right? Be more inquisitive than that. Ask us hard questions and demand answers from us about what's happening and what's not, but be open-minded, and let's have a conversation together about exactly what we're trying to do versus not trying to do.
Thank you. I do have a few follow-up questions myself, but I want to open it up to the floor here. If there are questions that you all might have, feel free to unmute, and small enough screen, I think I can see call on you if you have some questions. Ed?
Kevin, thanks for being with us. You mentioned earlier in the looking at identifying board members, looking at philanthropic capacity and kind of what they're able to do to support in that part. How do you balance that with what you just talked about with DEI? I mean, there's voices on our board that say our board really needs to reflect the students we serve. And if we have a bunch of high earners and no middle class, but then on the advancement side, our advancement team says, well, in order to do and achieve our goals, we need more high earners. How have you engaged in that conversation with your board?
Yeah, I mean, oh, sure, of course. Thanks for the question. It's a really good one. I view boards, the best boards are those that are extraordinarily balanced, right? Yes, of course, we absolutely need financial capacity on our board, but we're not doing the institution a great service by having that be a dominant factor to the exclusion of others. To me, the value of a board is in the usefulness of the conversations at the meetings themselves and the decisions that we make to move the institution forward. So, there's markers of identity, there's industry expertise, right? There's geographic diversity. There's all these things matter. A lot of boards have young alumni slots, right, for the voice of the more recent student. I have a particular appreciation for parents on the board as well, who are experiencing the institution in different ways. Many of the calls that I get about what's not going well at Marist come from parents, right? So it's better for me to have those voices in the boardroom and that are able to share their experiences in ways that move the board forward. So that's why I wanted to be very intentional with the openings that we had on the board. I have a bias. This is, I think, counter to maybe what other presidents want and counter to common logic is I'd rather have a larger board. Again, because I believe in the value of committee meetings where the work is being done. We can carve up the board in smaller settings and have great conversations at the committee level. But the larger the board is, within reason, of course, the more likely we're able to have the right perspectives, or a variety of perspectives, I should say, in the room for any given issue that we're working on. That said, I like our board members to be generalists as well, right? I don't want the only time that we hear from the CPA in the room when we're going through the financial statement audit, right? Like we've got 35 open slots or available slots on the board, and the best conversations are the ones where you're not even really sure what someone's form of expertise is because they're facile and able to jump in and willing to jump in on any particular issue. So, diversity of board representation in all its forms is critical. And as you say, we're serving a particular student body. If the board doesn't have at least some way, either through our work as administrators in educating them about what today's students and parents expect, or if they themselves don't share any forms of overlap with the students we're trying to serve, then we're probably not going to be having the best conversations that we can when we get together for meetings.
Other questions? Bill?
Patrick, I got one. Dr. Weinman, how do you, or do you have any kind of a program where you keep your former trustees involved with the school in some way, shape, or form?
Yeah, so officially we do through our life trustee status. So for board members who serve with distinction, as the board itself defines, they are extended life trustee status, which allows them to attend full board and open board meetings, not confidential closed sessions, and all of the many social events that boards participate in, be it dinners and breakfasts and so forth around board meetings, or commencement and so forth. So yeah, we we view a happy end to one's service on the board as one where there's continuing forms of involvement, just in different ways. So we actually don't have a lot of former board members because we don't have term limits. So there might be other presidents that have better answers here, because it's a relatively small group, again, because we've got folks who've been on the board for 30, 40 years or so. But we did talk about this a lot as we issued a few elements of board reform, that the life trustee status, we want to be something special and earned through exceptional service, but that any former board member occupies a special place from having been a servant leader to the institution, and we want them to stay close to the college.
Thank you.
Others?
I've got a question.
Teresa?
Thank you for being with us today. Your information is invaluable. My question is the student body and the parent community aware of who the board members are? Like, is there communication between that, or is it just sort of behind the scenes?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, right? Because as you might pick up, my general bias here is towards transparency, right? And openness and so forth. But I also don't want us to position our board members to be subject to forms of outreach that put them in a difficult spot, right? So we don't publish the names and contact information of our board members. Many schools do. We've chosen not to. Any member of our community can reach the Board of Trustees through a genericized email, and we make sure that inquiries are responded to, and to the extent that that response should come from the board, we'll facilitate that. But we in some ways lean towards protecting board members identity and service here as a priority. We have taken to, and this was not done prior to my arrival, and it's something that I think is really terrific, which is after every board meeting, the board chair and myself publish a letter to the entire community about some of the key doings of the board, the outcomes of the meeting, the decisions that were made, and so forth. So we want people to be aware of the existence of the board and what it's doing, how and what decisions that they're making, but not have the board be sort of out as in a more public way. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
I mean, again, I don't know that we have that right. I don't know that we have anything right that I've been talking about this entire meeting, but it's just sort of one college's and one president's view of things. But that question is tricky. We don't want to discourage people from serving on the board because they're being subjected to, we got 50,000 alumni. They don't always agree with me and what the college is doing. I am totally fine handling any form of concern from anyone. I've engaged in one-on-one conversations with people who've sent me some of the angriest emails I've ever gotten in my life. But I don't know that a board member who's serving 3-4 meetings a year needs to be subjected to that same kind of outreach.
Thank you.
I think our heads of schools can relate to that pretty well. I got a question here in the chat. All right, I'll answer that in a little bit. Well, I'll turn this into a question. Do you have, Kevin, current parents that would ever sit on the board?
We do not have current parents. We have recent parents. As I mentioned before, I really like having parents on the board because their experience is more recent. I'm not opposed to sitting parents being on the board. However, it puts the student in a tricky spot, and the parent has to recuse themselves from conversations about tuition and so forth. So there are some complications with that. We have a very robust parents council that gives parents an opportunity to have a voice in how the college is run. It's where I learned in one of my meetings with the parents council that somehow the French fries had gone away in the dining hall for a couple days, and the students were outraged at that. So sometimes we have to nudge them to be a little more strategic and high-minded. But I'm also fine learning about whether we have French fries in the dining hall or not. But many of those parents end up becoming candidates for full board membership after the student graduates, and we've got 3 or 4 parents of former students who sit on the board right now, and they're terrific contributing members. For your schools, that the question might be a little a little more different, a little different than for a college, but it's that parent that's sort of between, say, 2 and 7 years out that is to me is a really great time for them to join the board.
Yeah, excellent. And that was a discussion within our network a few years back about whether parents should be on the board. And I think everybody knows the pros and the cons of it. For the person that direct messaged me on that, within our network, I'd say the majority of schools do have parents serving as board directors, trustees, but again, very carefully selected. And that conversation about being able to distinguish your role as trustee and parent. But typically the parents that I've seen on our boards understand that nuance and respect it closely. Again, I'm gonna open up to other questions. I've got a couple others I can ask Kevin, but if others on the group would like to ask.
Patrick, I have another one.
Oh, go ahead, Bill.
Okay, sorry. Thanks. Dr. Weinman, I was wondering if in your experience, both with Marist and other places, that you come in contact with a trustee who may be a very, very large donor, who seems to think that they have a right that's higher than other board members, or perhaps even a say in how management goes and stuff like that, and what your advice might be on trying to handle board members like that.
Yeah, it's a timely question too, right? As you've seen some big donors to some Ivy League schools sort of weaponizing their own philanthropy and trying to shape policy and behaviors in ways that are not healthy and not appropriate. But it's tricky. One of the things, I mean, just to be bluntly honest about it, of course, one of the things that we're trying to do with boards is make certain folks insiders, right? And have them participate in ways that we're not making available to, the other 50,000 alumni that we have. So of course there should be some expectation of, an enhanced closeness to the college. Yet we have to be very careful upon the moment of gift acceptance that it's understood what that gift, what right that's granting versus what right it's not granting here. And many trustees will want to be involved in how their gift is used, and there really does have to be a moment of let's get the restriction set up front and written into the gift agreement, but after that, the college's administration and current leadership, so long as they're meeting the restriction that was a condition of the gift, need to be allowed to do their to do that work without interference. So I haven't had to do this yet at Marist, but when I was CFO at Amherst, we actually turned a few gifts down because it was clear that we were not going to get to a place with the donor that there was going to be an acceptable respect for that line. Those are tough conversations, and but better to deal with them up front if it really appears as though that's going to be a problem. What's more difficult, I think, for Harvard and others right now is it's more just a generalized dissatisfaction from some of their major donors, not specific to whatever gift that they made. But it's I think we all know it's not, we're not in a great place if donors are threatening to withhold or not follow through on a pledge based on a point of dissatisfaction with the institution, because I can't make everybody in this job happy, right? I mean, every decision I make on every issue, there's some element of my, the 50,000 alums and the 6,000 students and 12,000 parents that's not going to be satisfied, and that's fine. It's their right. It's also their right not to give. That's completely fine as well. But where it becomes weaponized or turns into an attempt to influence in ways that are just not appropriate, those are situations we just have to try to avoid.
Thank you.
Father Lawton?
Okay.
Yeah.
I really like your idea, Kevin, of having a set of aspirational schools. And I'm just wondering, how have you chosen the aspirational schools? What do you look at?
Sean, do you want to jump in? You were closely involved here. I'm happy to offer my thoughts as well, but
it actually took a group of people to pare those down. Some of them you look at athletics, others retention and graduation rates, others what they're doing with their admissions, others could be academic programming. So there really is a lot that goes into it, and it's not as easy as one would think. However, with the help of IT and the woman who co-chaired the strategic plan and a few other folks, we actually were able to put about 15 schools on the board, and then IT really helped us identify what metrics are we really concerned about, and do they match up with our strategic plan and our mission, and where do we see ourselves in 7 to 10 to 20 years. And that helped us really refine the list down to a manageable number. And then we ran it by Kevin, of course, and the board, and then we came to an agreement. So,
I mean, it's more, we tried to make it as data driven as possible, as Sean mentioned, across key metrics that we believe ourselves are important indicators of our success as an institution. Well, let's compare our numbers to other schools and see, find those that are roughly similar across a number of different dimensions. There's also, voting with their feet. What students, if we admit and another school admits, always choose the other school or always choose us. Those are probably not overlaps, but are there some 40%, 60%, 60%, 40% schools? Those in the eyes of prospective students, those are two schools that student sees as similar. But then we made some judgment calls that we weren't going to include any public universities, even though we compete very heavily with the SUNY system and UConn, right? But those are not peer institutions because we're just fundamentally different models. So, again, a lot of art with the science, but as much science as we could work in there, and sort of art at the end to round the list out.
Other questions from the group? Maybe as folks might be thinking, Kevin, I do want to ask, so talking about, the lack of term limits, when you came in 21, so that's one example of perhaps an institution just kind of holding on to a practice because it's tradition, but perhaps not really evaluating, does that make sense? So I got to imagine there might have been some nuance for you and new leadership to kind of help move the board towards some more current practices. So can you talk just a little bit about, like, if you see, a board that's kind of clinging on to tradition that just doesn't make sense anymore today? What does that look like for you as president, and how could other board directors kind of help steer the greater whole of the board to be more current and to really take a critical look at how they are governing, how they are functioning, and making sure that they're not holding on to traditions simply for tradition's sake?
Yeah, this is a really great question because it's, it ties together a lot of what I've said already, right? Like coming in my first year and not rocking the boat too much, right? For trying to understand, why don't we have term limits? How has that served us versus not serving us? Turns out at Marist, there's a really good reason why we don't. And that is, Dennis Murray ran Marist for 39 years. He took over in 1979. We had only been a 4-year degree granting institution for about 15 years. We didn't have alumni who were at a stage of their career where they could, serve the institution in the manner that they can now. So no term limits was a strategy to build a board and to keep that board engaged while the institution was maturing, right? So once I understood that, I can speak about it to the board in a way that is reverential to why they did it. It was a genius strategy and it really worked, but also to impress upon the board to say, now we're at a different place. We have, as I travel about across the country and meet with alumni, I'm meeting a lot of people who are at a stage of their career where they're ready and eager to serve because of their professional expertise, their volunteer support of the college in various ways, their philanthropic capacity. Then I can say, listen, this is not a personal, we're not trying to kick people off the board. We're trying to reflect the fact that we are in a different place and we should celebrate that. Now it's time to get more alumni on the board. It's time to have them rotate through in a slightly, 12 years is still a long board, time to serve. Most people after 12 years are probably ready to move on to another assignment or to say, listen, I did my job and now it's time to let someone else step in. So, always coming at any sort of tradition or practice, even if it's out of alignment with what I understand to be current best practice, always coming to that thought process with respect for it and with the historical curiosity about how is it and why is it with this that this was done. And then we can talk about how is it that we might want to think about sunsetting this as we go forward for a positive reason and a positive aim, not just because it's out of alignment. If you tell somebody, hey, we got to get rid of this because it's not best practice, they're gonna be defensive. They're gonna say, you're telling us that we've done something wrong. But no, it's just we're at a different phase right now. Let's think more about the future than about the past.
Great. I've got
It's
one last
especially
question on
tricky.
my
I'm
end.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's especially tricky for me because my board they're my bosses, right? Like I don't get to pick them. They get to pick me. So but hopefully they hired me because they want me to push and prod and challenge the status quo. I just need to understand how to do so in a way that's productive and respectful, but also firm in ways that I really think we need to think differently about the future.
Great. Again, one last question of mine before I open it up to the floor a last time. So I know there's a lot of research out there, certainly on the high school level, that talks about the importance of the president board chair relationship, and just that's so crucial towards total effectiveness of board governance. So just talk a little bit about how you and your board chair look to keep a strong relationship beyond setting agendas and doing the normal course of business of the board.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, I can't overestimate the importance of being in close touch between those two roles. So we'll have dinner once a month in person. And yes, I'll bring maybe 2 or 3 items of business to those conversations, but they're largely unscripted. And, we're chatting about what's going on at the college, what's going on with each other's families, right? But so because that rapport is really critical. The board chair is such a special role, the commitment of time and attention and the willingness to be the communicator of a tough decision. The possibility a board chair has of having to let go a president, right? Like when you sign up to be a board chair, you're signing up for a really serious duty, and hopefully it goes well. And some of those tougher sides of being a board chair don't have to occur on your watch. But so that is afforded all kinds of respect from me and presidents, right? That it's a volunteer duty, but it's one that comes with significant burdens and risks. So I go out of my way to inform the board chair about things I know. When I know them, I have a good news, tell me good news fast, bad news faster policy, and a lot of that means I'm letting the board chair know about something that might not be a board matter, but is important for the chair to know and hear from me. Certainly better to hear from me than to hear from another member of the community. And so to preserve that trust, that open communication, that deep personal interest and respect for each other as 2 people that have signed up for really challenging duty is really critical.
Thank you, Kevin. Well, I know we're kind of closing in on an hour here, so I'll give one last opportunity if there's any other questions folks would like to throw out to Dr. Weinman while we've got them.
I have a quick question, Kevin. So in the structure that you've got such a large board with so many people, do you have an executive committee that you meet with on a regular basis?
We do. We have a 7-person executive committee, which is empowered to do business on behalf of the college between board meetings. I also lean very heavily, again, not to keep coming back to my theme of committees, but the committee chairs are really important to me. We often will have dialogue. Before every meeting, the vice president that staffs a committee and the committee member will have conversations. But quite often, I'll bounce. If there's an opportunistic property acquisition, I'll be in touch with the chairs of building and grounds and the chairs of finance between meetings. So again, it is a big board. It's probably bigger than conventional wisdom would suggest, but because we have a variety of mechanisms to compartmentalize and to work with subsets of the board, and we can save the bigger matters for full board conversations, I think it can work.
Thanks.
Kevin, who are the 7 on the executive committee? Because that's something I see in our network. It varies from board to board who comprises the executive committee.
Yeah, there's only 3 of them that are there ex officio, so it's the board chair and the 2 vice chairs, and the other 4 are elected members. So typically longer serving, well-respected members of the board will be chosen by their peers to serve on the executive committee.
And do they similarly look to elect diversity into that executive committee? So it's not, 4 finance people or 4 advancement people, trying to have some variety?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it becomes harder when you're dealing with numbers like 6 or 7 versus 35, but yes, absolutely. It's, we don't have, I know some boards will have all the committee chairs plus the chair of the board serve as an executive committee. That's another model, but I like the way the board has always done it, which is to have some discretionary element over, half of the membership.
Very good. We have time for one more question, if there might be one. Yeah, I think we are looking good. So Kevin, I am very grateful for your time. I know you're extremely busy with everything that you got going on there at Marist, but we wish you and Marist all the best. And Sean, many thanks for helping to bring us together with Kevin, but really appreciate, Kevin, the expertise you've been able to share for this group. As we talked on the phone, I think our boards are pretty advanced compared to most Catholic school boards out there in the country. And we're always looking for new learning. And I think quite often we're starting to look to the college university side to see what tips of wisdom we can gather. And I think you helped provide that today. So appreciate everything you've been able to do for us today, Kevin. Thank you.
Ron, your questions were so great. I really appreciate it. We're dealing with the same issues for sure, even if it's in different landscape, a different part of the higher ed landscape. So I learned a lot from you as well, and really appreciate the invitation. And anytime I can be helpful, please let me know.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. Appreciate it. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.